What's up, nerds? That's right, you read the title correctly. We're doing another horror recommendations video. Last year, around this time, I made a video walking through some of my most highly touted, most highly recommended horror reads when it came to the spooky season. So likewise, this year, I'm gonna make some updates. I'm gonna add on to that list, and we're gonna go through some of the best in class when it comes to the grotesque, the horrific, the horror reads for spooky season 2022. The first book I'm going to talk about, I read it over the summer, but it gave me those Halloween vibes that I was longing for in the dead 95-degree humid Pennsylvania heat in the middle of July. And that book is Hex. Now, you may have heard of Hex before. This author has also written the book called Echo, and Hex is about this town called Black Spring where a witch happens to reside, and that witch has been around since the 17th century. This witch is just stuck in this town, and the people just sort of accept the witch as a curse, and they have to install protocols and rules and curfews and government cover-ups just to sort of maintain their normalcy in town. And one day, some of the youths of the town get sort of restless, and they're longing for that picture-perfect high school life. They're also trying to go viral on the internet, and they start sort of experimenting with some of the systems that are put in place, some of the behaviors of this 17th century witch. They metaphorically poke the bear and crap hits the fan immediately. This is a very unique approach to that typical sort of lurking entity in the background where it is just in the foreground. Everyone knows what the threat is, but they don't want to sort of upset the status quo. Until these kids do it, things just get pretty nuts. It is a sort of slow burn that seems to simultaneously move fast and have that pedal to the metal feel. If you're looking for something that is very witchy yet super nuanced and innovative in that space, I would definitely recommend reading Hex. So the next book I'm going to recommend is by an author, if you're into horror, that you're probably familiar with. He wrote The Troop. That is Nick Cutter, and this one is Little Heaven. And it definitely had that same sort of vibe as The Troop. If you're familiar with that, it's like a lot of body horror. It's a lot of grotesque, eerily specific descriptions about just bad things happening to people. And this has a whole lot of that. This is about a sort of backwoods religious cult that has taken a family, including a mother and a boy, and a gang of mercenaries who had some old run-ins years ago, decide to team up and help out and go into this cult, infiltrate, and hopefully come out with the kid in a better knowledge of like what is going on in this cult. Again, there are grotesque and disgusting and shocking discoveries the whole way through. It's a really interesting back and forth timeline at different points. More and more is revealed about this cult as well as the mercenaries' personal lives. I don't know if I'd say it's better than The Troop, but if you're looking for something that is in that sort of arena, this is definitely that. And if you're into Nick Cutter's writing and his approach to horror, I would definitely recommend Little Heaven. The next book I'm going to recommend, I actually read this last year, and it gave me every single thing I want to feel during the fall, during Halloween season. It plays heavily into nostalgia. So if you're somebody who's just always feeling nostalgic for like childhood memories around fall and like town fairs and carnivals in the fall and all that stuff, I would definitely recommend Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes. This is one of my favorite books in general, and it's not really horror. This is like horror light compared to a lot of these. There's definitely creepy stuff that happens, but I would call it more like literary fiction side of horror than like straight up horror. I definitely recommend this to people who admire great writing and that ability for a writer to just evoke every fuzzy nostalgic feeling within you. It's about two young boys who are sort of drawn in by this traveling carnival, and you have interesting figures tempting these boys with things that are seemingly harmless. As more and more about this traveling carnival is presented and discovers, you realize that something much more ominous than just your typical town fair has come into town. And yeah, I cannot say enough about how much I love this book. You need to read it if you haven't. The next book I'm going to recommend, it's much different than just your typical novel. This is a story told in 6 novellas. It is Goblin by Josh Malerman, the same guy who wrote Bird Box. If you're familiar with the Netflix movie or the novel, super interesting. It's all about this town that is called Goblin, and you have a sort of setting-based horror story here where different parts of this town's dark history related to different residents at different points in history is revealed throughout each of these 6 novellas, and some of them are sort of taking place on the same rainy night simultaneously, while other ones are sort of looking back into the past to explain some of the weird things going on around this town. Each novella, standalone, really solid. I didn't think there was a lull at any point in this collection. I thought Josh Malerman did a really amazing job at conveying just how passionate he is about horror, and did it with a really interesting approach. If you don't want to read an entire novel, but you want to sort of have that segmented reading experience while still getting everything that you want to get out of a horror story, I would definitely recommend Goblin. And then my final recommendation is going to be all the same writer, technically 3, now 4 books that I've read by him. But I've been absolutely obsessed with Eric Larocca this year when it comes to horror. The first book I read by Eric Larocca was You've Lost a Lot of Blood. I afterward read this little number, We Can Never Leave This Place. And then finally, I recently finished Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke and Other Misfortunes, a re-release of his sort of groundbreaking, huge, out-of-nowhere novella, along with 2 other pieces to the collection. Such an amazing writer, so innovative. Again, sort of works in that arena of sort of like intense body horror at certain times, but Eric Larocca is an outstanding writer, gets you to feel everything you want to and don't want to feel. And when it comes to horror, I've never really read anyone like that, who just so quickly has you in the palm of their hand in such a short amount of time. Most of his work that I've read has been anywhere between 100 and 200 pages long at the longest. So these stories are extremely fast-paced, all styled a little bit differently, but they have this connecting thread that sort of exposes like a dark underbelly of the human existence and this desire for connection that can absolutely transform people in the worst ways. And Eric Larocca just knows how to do it. Feels like these books were written specifically for those horror fans who have been looking for something new over the years. I cannot wait to see what Eric Larocca continues to do. My actual final recommendation, a book I don't currently have because I so highly recommended it to somebody else that I let them borrow it, is Stephen Graham Jones' My Heart is a Chainsaw. This book did not come out this year. A lot of these books didn't come out this year. Stephen Graham Jones is one of my favorite horror authors at this point. My Heart is a Chainsaw has a sequel coming out very soon. It is about this high school student who sort of sees the formulaic progression of a slasher starting to unfold in her hometown, but nobody around town believes her. They all think she is crazy and that there is absolutely nothing going on, when in reality there's a lot going on. And again, the sequel comes out towards the beginning of 2023, so if you are a slasher fan, I would definitely read My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones and check out the sequel when it comes out. So those are my top horror recommendations. If you're curious what I talked about last year, you can check out last year's video, but hopefully this new installment does not disappoint. Hope you're all well, staying safe out there, keep reading, and I'll hopefully see you soon.